In 1879, a mountain man had 9 girls. 9 little strangers, all with his piercing blue eyes, all wearing dresses from another time. Folks whispered in the church pews, were they his children, orphans, or miracles from God himself? For nearly 4 decades, the town kept guessing. But now, 37 years later, they've all come back. Grown women, still carrying the same eyes, the same hair, and secrets that could split a family apart. Because hidden among them is one girl with a truth too dangerous to name, and men in iron suits of the railroad will do anything to take what belongs to them. Who really were these 9 girls? What did the mountain man hide before he died? And when the past finally collides with the present, will the sisters stand as one, or lose everything they ever called family? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. A bitter wind swept across the Colorado highlands, driving thick snowflakes against the weathered walls of Timber Ridge's small clapboard church. Inside, the pot-bellied stove radiated warmth as parishioners settled into their usual Sunday morning routine. The creak of wooden pews and hushed greetings filled the air, along with the scent of pine boughs decorating the altar for the winter season. The door hinges groaned. A collective hush fell over the congregation as Charles Boone's tall frame filled the doorway. Snow dusted his broad shoulders and graying beard. But it wasn't his presence alone that caused the stillness. It was the 9 little girls who followed him inside like a row of ducklings. They moved with careful steps, their calico dresses patched but clean, their dark hair neatly braided. Most striking were their eyes, startlingly blue, like pieces of summer sky caught in winter. The smallest girl couldn't have been more than 5 years old, while the tallest looked to be approaching 12. Martha Wilson dropped her hymnal. The clatter echoed through the shocked silence. Charles guided the girls into an empty pew near the back, his weathered hands gentle as he helped the littlest ones settle. Their boots, though well worn, had been recently cleaned of mud. Their faces were scrubbed pink, showing care had been taken with their appearance. Reverend Thomas cleared his throat from the pulpit. "Welcome, Brother Charles. We've missed you these past few Sundays." Charles simply nodded, his expression unchanged. The girls sat perfectly still, hands folded in their laps, though a few exchanged quick glances with each other. Their connection was obvious in those silent looks. Whatever their story, they were already bonded as sisters. "The Lord gave me charge of 'em," Charles said quietly, his deep voice carrying in the hushed church. He offered no further explanation, and his stern demeanor discouraged questions. Throughout the service, whispers rustled like autumn leaves. Who were these children? Where had they come from? Charles Boone was known as a loner, a skilled trapper, who kept to himself in his cabin outside town. The idea of him suddenly appearing with 9 young girls seemed impossible. Sarah Miller leaned toward her husband. "Look at those eyes, same as his, clear as mountain lakes. Could they be—" "Hush now," James Miller whispered back. "Man's entitled to his privacy." The girls participated in the hymns with soft voices, sharing books between them. When the collection plate came around, Charles dropped in a single coin with dignity. The smallest girl reached for his rough hand afterward, and he let her hold it. After the final prayer, the congregation filed out into the snowy morning. Charles and his charges were the last to leave, but curious townspeople lingered by the church steps, watching. At the mercantile, tongues wagged freely. Mary Beth Cooper, the shopkeeper's wife, held court behind the counter, while several women gathered to share theories. "Must be orphans from back east," suggested Emma Parker, adjusting her shawl. "Though why they'd send them to a confirmed bachelor living alone in the wilderness is beyond me." "Perhaps they're his brother's children," mused Martha Wilson, "though I never heard tell of him having family." "Those eyes, though," Mary Beth insisted, "same as Charles Boone's. There's a story there, mark my words." Meanwhile, in his sturdy log cabin tucked against the mountainside, Charles stirred a pot of rabbit stew hanging over the hearth. The savory aroma filled the single room, mixing with wood smoke from the stone fireplace. He'd clearly prepared for the girls' arrival. New straw-tick mattresses were piled with quilts in the corner, and extra hooks had been added along the walls for coats and dresses. The girls moved around the cabin with the ease of several days' familiarity. The older ones helped the younger ones remove boots and hang up wraps. They worked together smoothly, as if they'd done this many times before. "Sarah, help Rachel with her buttons," the eldest girl directed quietly. "Mary, would you fetch the bowls?" Charles watched them from the corner of his eye as he tended the stew. His weathered face softened slightly when the littlest one, Hannah, tugged at his pant leg. "Smells good, Papa Charles," she said, and his hand briefly touched her head. The other girls had begun holding hands, forming a circle near the fire. It was clearly a routine they'd established, something that brought them comfort. Their faces reflected both their individual features and a shared determination that spoke of survival against odds. The wind outside grew fiercer, rattling the shutters. Charles ladled stew into 9 bowls, making sure each portion had plenty of meat. The girls sat cross-legged on their quilts, balancing the bowls carefully. "Thank you, Papa Charles," they murmured one by one. When they had finished eating, Charles knelt by the fireplace. The flames cast dancing shadows on the log walls as he bowed his head. "Lord," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "give me strength to raise these daughters you've placed in my care. Guide my hands and heart to be worthy of this trust. Help me show them your love through my own, poor as it may be." The girls watched him with solemn eyes. The eldest, Rebecca, reached out to squeeze his shoulder, a gesture both comforting and grateful. As evening deepened, Charles added wood to the fire while the girls prepared for bed. They helped each other into nightgowns, braided hair for sleeping, and settled onto their quilts. The younger ones clustered close to the older girls, seeking warmth and security. Charles moved among them, tucking blankets and murmuring quiet goodnights. The lamplight flickered across their faces, 9 pairs of blue eyes growing heavy with sleep, 9 expressions of trust in this man who had somehow become their father. The smallest one, Hannah, reached for his hand one last time. "Story, Papa Charles?" He settled onto a stool, his large frame bent toward them. "Once there was a lonely man who lived in these mountains," he began softly. "He thought the Lord had given him all he needed, a warm cabin, good hunting, and peace. But the Lord knew better and sent him the greatest blessing a man could receive." The girls smiled, clearly having heard this story before. One by one, their eyes drifted closed as Charles's low voice continued. The lamp cast a gentle glow over their sleeping faces, while outside, snow continued to fall on the Colorado highlands, blanketing their new home in pristine white. Charles remained by the fire, watching over his sleeping daughters. His weathered hands, more accustomed to rifle and trap than tender care, were folded in silent prayer. Whatever circumstances had brought these children to him, whatever challenges lay ahead, his resolve was evident in every line of his face. He had chosen this path, chosen them, and would defend that choice with all the strength and faith he possessed. The wind howled beyond the cabin walls, but inside, warmth and love had taken root. 9 little girls slept peacefully, their dark hair spread across pillows, their faces reflecting the same stark beauty as the man who now watched over them. Together, they had already begun to forge something precious, a family built not on blood, but on the deeper bonds of choice and faith. The lamp burned low as Charles finally stretched out on his own blankets near the door. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new whispers from the town, new lessons in being both father and mother to 9 growing girls. But for now, in the quiet of their sanctuary, peace reigned. The only sounds were soft breathing, crackling flames, and the endless Colorado wind, singing its ancient lullaby to the unlikely family sheltered beneath its wild sky. Dawn broke cold and clear over the Colorado highlands. Frost sparkled on the cabin's window panes as Charles Boone rose from his bedroll, careful not to wake the sleeping girls. He stoked the dying embers and added fresh kindling, watching as small flames licked at the dry wood. One by one, the girls stirred. Rebecca, the eldest at 13, was first to rise, helping the younger ones fold their quilts and straighten their hair. Charles nodded approvingly as they moved through their morning routine with quiet efficiency. "Mary, Sarah, fetch water from the creek," Rebecca directed softly. "Rachel and Ruth, help me with breakfast. Hannah, stay close to the cabin while Papa Charles chops wood. Outside, frost crunched under Charles's boots as he approached the woodpile. The axe felt natural in his hands. This was work he understood. The steady rhythm of chopping filled the crisp morning air. The whistle of the blade, the solid thunk of metal meeting wood, the sharp crack of splitting logs. Mary and Sarah trudged past with their water buckets, their breath forming small clouds in the cold air. They were strong girls, but the buckets were heavy. Water sloshed over their boots as they carefully made their way back to the cabin. "Let me help with that," Charles said, setting down his axe. He took the heavier bucket from Sarah, who smiled gratefully. Inside, Rebecca had her hands full. She was trying to mend Hannah's torn dress while keeping an eye on the morning porridge. The littlest ones were supposed to be sweeping, but they seemed more interested in chasing dust motes in the pale sunlight streaming through the windows. "Hannah, child, stand still." Rebecca sighed as the youngest sister wiggled away from her measuring. "This hem won't fix itself." Hannah pouted. "Don't like chores, want a plaker?" Charles's deep voice carried from the doorway. "Work comes before play, little one. That's the way of things out here." After a simple breakfast of porridge and dried apples, Charles announced they needed supplies from town. The girls quickly tidied up and donned their warmest shawls. They made quite a sight walking down the muddy street to Timberidge's main square, Charles and his worn buckskins leading 9 girls in patched calico dresses. At the blacksmith shop, Charles discussed having some tools repaired while the girls waited patiently outside. Through the open door, they could hear the blacksmith's concerned voice. "9 little ones, Charles? And you all alone?" The blacksmith shook his head, hammer pausing mid-strike. "Seems like madness if you don't mind my saying so. One child's handful enough for most folks with 2 parents." Charles's reply was measured but firm. "The Lord sends us what burdens he knows we can bear, Tom." "The Lord helps those who help themselves, too," the blacksmith countered. "You thought about the county orphanage over in Denver? Might be better for them." "No." Charles's tone left no room for argument. "They're my daughters now. Papers are filed and proper." The girls exchanged worried glances, drawing closer together. Hannah clutched Rebecca's skirts while Sarah and Mary linked arms protectively around their younger sisters. As they continued down the street, Miss Thompson, the schoolteacher, hurried over. Her face was pinched with concern as she addressed Charles. "Mr. Boone, I've heard about your situation," she began delicately. "The orphanage in Denver has an excellent reputation. They could provide—" "Much obliged for your concern, ma'am," Charles interrupted, touching the brim of his hat. "But we managed just fine." He gestured for the girls to keep walking, effectively ending the conversation. That evening, the cabin was warm and snug against the gathering darkness. Charles had taught the older girls to make cornbread, and the smell of it baking in the Dutch oven mingled with the simple aroma of simmering beans. The younger ones set out tin plates and cups while Rebecca stirred the pot with careful attention. By lantern light, they gathered for their evening meal. Charles bowed his head, and 9 young voices joined his in prayer. "Lord, we thank you for this food, for our shelter, and for bringing us together as family. Guide us through whatever trials may come. Amen." As they ate, Charles cleared his throat. "Listen close, girls. Life out here ain't easy, never has been, never will be. Town folks might not understand our family, but that don't matter none. What matters is, we got each other, and we got God's hand to guide us." The girls nodded solemnly, sharing glances across their cornbread and beans. They'd already learned that Charles Boone wasn't a man for long speeches, which made his words all the more meaningful. Later, as Charles banked the fire for the night, whispers floated from the corner where the girls were preparing for bed. "We'll stick together, won't we?" Hannah's small voice quavered. "Course we will," Sarah assured her. "We're sisters now, all of us." "Promise," came the soft reply. "Promise," 8 voices answered in unison. The next morning brought Sunday services, and with them, fresh waves of speculation about Charles Boone and his unusual family. The congregation gathered in small clusters before and after the service, their discussions barely contained behind raised hands and lowered voices. 9 girls and him a confirmed bachelor. No proper raising without a mother's touch. But did you see how clean and well-behaved they are? Still, it ain't natural. The preacher's wife, Mrs. Henderson, listened to it all with a thoughtful expression. That afternoon, she appeared at Charles's cabin carrying a fresh-baked loaf of bread wrapped in a clean cloth. "Thought you might enjoy this with your supper," she said simply, pressing the warm loaf into Charles's hands. "The good book tells us to judge not, lest we be judged. Seems to me you're doing the Lord's work here, Mr. Boone." Charles ducked his head, momentarily speechless. "Much obliged, ma'am," he finally managed. Mrs. Henderson smiled gently. "Folks'll come around given time. Meanwhile, there's them that know kindness speaks louder than gossip." After she left, Charles carefully placed the bread in the cupboard, his weathered hands lingering on the cloth wrapping. The simple gesture of acceptance had touched him more deeply than he cared to show. That evening, while the girls worked on their lessons or mended clothes by lamplight, Charles sat in his chair by the fire. His knife moved steadily over a piece of pine wood, shavings curling away to reveal the shape within. One by one, small wooden animals emerged: a deer, a rabbit, a bear, each sized to fit perfectly in a child's hand. The girls watched with interest as he worked, but knew better than to interrupt. Charles's hands, so capable with axe and rifle, showed surprising gentleness as he carved delicate details into each tiny figure. His face was peaceful in the firelight, as if each stroke of the knife was a kind of prayer. 9 little wooden animals took shape that night, each unique, each crafted with care. They would be more than toys. They would be tokens of belonging, physical reminders that each girl had a place in this unlikely family. Charles worked until the last figure was complete, knowing that sometimes the greatest truths were spoken not in words, but in simple acts of love. The wind sang its endless song around the cabin corners, and 9 girls slowly drifted to sleep, their dreams filled with promises of sisterhood and the quiet certainty of their father's love. Charles continued his carving, each careful stroke an affirmation of his choice, each completed figure a small testament to the family they were becoming. Spring crept into the Colorado highlands with hesitant steps. Patches of snow retreated slowly beneath warm afternoon sun, leaving behind a patchwork of mud and new grass. The transformation brought its own challenges to the Boone family's daily routine. Charles stood in the doorway of the cabin studying the rutted path that led to town. "Rebecca, Sarah, get your shawls. We need supplies, and the wagon won't load itself." The 2 oldest girls hurried to comply while their younger sisters watched enviously. Charles had already hitched old Jake, their sturdy mule, to the wagon. The wooden wheels sank slightly in the soft earth as Rebecca and Sarah climbed aboard. The journey to Timber Ridge was slow going. Jake picked his way carefully through muddy patches while Charles walked alongside, occasionally helping the wagon through deeper ruts. The girls held tight to the wooden seat, their skirts carefully tucked away from the splashing mud. In town, the familiar weight of stairs settled upon them as Charles directed Jake toward the mercantile. Children playing marbles in the street stopped to point and whisper. A group of boys about Sarah's age nudged each other, snickering behind their hands. "Heard they ain't even real sisters," one boy said loudly enough to carry. "Just strays old Boone picked up somewhere." Sarah's cheeks flushed red, but she kept her chin high as Charles helped her down from the wagon. Inside the mercantile, Mrs. Potter greeted them with practiced politeness, though her eyes followed the girls' every movement. Charles methodically filled their list: flour, coffee, salt, lamp oil, and other necessities. "Best get some extra sugar," he told Rebecca. "Time to start putting up preserves soon as the berries come in." Rebecca nodded, carefully counting out the precious white cubes. Behind them, 2 women browsing dress patterns whispered and cast sideways glances. "Never seen such a thing," one murmured. "Man raising 9 girls alone? Ain't natural." "And where'd they all come from?" the other replied, "and nobody knows for certain." Outside, the situation had deteriorated. More children had gathered, emboldened by numbers. As Sarah emerged carrying a heavy sack of flour, a clod of mud struck her skirt. "Orphan," a boy shouted, "ain't got no real family." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She dropped the flour sack and ran, her boots splashing through puddles as she fled toward the church at the end of the street. Charles's face darkened, but he kept his voice steady. "Rebecca, mind the wagon. I'll fetch your sister." He found Sarah behind the church, crying quietly in the shadow of the bell tower. Charles lowered himself beside her on a worn wooden bench, his joints creaking slightly. "Reckon those boys upset you something fierce," he said quietly. Sarah wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "They said we ain't real family. That we're just strays you found somewhere." Charles was silent for a long moment, watching a pair of sparrows hop through the new grass. "Family ain't just about blood, child. It's about love and choice and doing right by them God puts in your path." "But they're right, ain't they?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "None of us was born to you." Charles turned to face her fully. "Listen close now. Every one of you girls is mine because I chose you, and you chose to be mine. That's stronger than any accident of birth. Don't you never let nobody tell you different." Sarah leaned against his shoulder, her tears slowly subsiding. Together they walked back to the wagon, where Rebecca had efficiently organized the loading of their supplies. The ride home was quiet, but the silence felt peaceful rather than strained. Back at the cabin, Charles set the older girls to organizing while he worked on building new storage shelves along the back wall. Hannah and Mary handed him nails from his toolbox while he demonstrated proper techniques for securing the boards. "Got to think ahead," he explained as he worked. "Winter'll come again sure as sunrise, and proper storage means food on the table when times get lean." The afternoon passed in productive activity. Charles showed them how to wrap root vegetables in sand, how to string dried herbs from the rafters, and how to identify which preserves needed eating first. The girls absorbed it all eagerly, asking questions and helping arrange their stores. As evening approached, dark clouds began building over the mountains. The wind picked up, carrying the sharp scent of coming rain. Charles hurried to secure the livestock while the girls battened down the cabin shutters. The storm broke just after supper. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by crashes of thunder that rattled the windows in their frames. The younger girls huddled together on their quilts, jumping at particularly loud booms. "Come on now," Charles called, stoking the fire higher. "Gather round here where it's warm. Might be time for a story." 9 pairs of eyes fixed on him expectantly as the girls arranged themselves in a semicircle. Rain drummed steadily on the roof, creating a cozy backdrop to Charles's deep voice. "Reckon you girls ought to know how you came to be here," he began. "Each of you has your own tale, though some ain't easy to tell." He started with Rebecca, found as a toddler in an abandoned wagon train, her family lost to cholera. Sarah had been discovered half frozen in a mountain cabin after her parents died in an early blizzard. Mary's mother had died in childbirth at a remote trading post, her father following soon after from grief. Each story was different yet similar in its sadness. Hannah had been left at a mission door. Emma's family's farm had burned, leaving her alone. Sophie had been found wandering after Indians raided her family's homestead. Little Beth had been discovered in a flooded creek bed, miraculously alive. When he came to Amelia, Charles's voice grew quieter. "Some stories ain't mine to tell in full," he said, his eyes distant. "But know this, each of you was meant to be here, meant to be family." The girls listened intently, drawing closer together as the tales unfolded. Even those too young to remember their own stories seemed to sense the weight of the moment. Lightning continued to flash outside, but the cabin felt secure, wrapped in the warmth of shared history and purpose. "What matters now," Charles concluded, "ain't how you came to be here, but what we make of our lives together. The Lord had his reasons for bringing us together, and I aim to honor that trust." The storm raged on outside, but inside the cabin, 9 sisters held each other close, their bond strengthened by knowing more of their shared past. Charles watched them quietly, his weathered face peaceful in the firelight. The mystery of Amelia's origin remained unspoken, but the love that bound them all together needed no explanation. Rain continued to beat against the roof as the evening drew to a close. The girls prepared for bed, whispering and giggling together as they arranged their quilts. Charles banked the fire carefully, his movements practiced and sure. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they were safe, warm, and together, a family bound by choice rather than blood, stronger for knowing the truth of their beginnings. The seasons turned like pages in an almanac, each bringing its own trials to test the Boone family's resolve. Through 1880, the summer sun baked the earth hard as iron. Crops withered in the fields while creek beds cracked and dried. Charles taught the girls to find water seeping from limestone cliffs and to recognize which plants could still be foraged when others failed. Watch here, he showed them, pointing to a patch of purslane growing in the shade. Even in drought, God provides if you know where to look. Rebecca, now 12, carefully gathered the succulent leaves while teaching her younger sisters which parts were best for eating. The girls worked together, their sunbonnets bobbing like pale flowers against the dusty ground. Their dresses, though faded, were kept meticulously clean and mended, a point of pride that Charles had instilled in them. When autumn finally broke the drought's grip, influenza swept through the valley like wildfire. Charles kept the girls isolated in their mountain cabin, burning sage and cedar to purify the air. Emma, barely 8, developed a worrying cough that kept them all awake at night. The sisters took turns pressing cool cloths to her forehead while Charles rode through darkness to fetch the doctor. "Ain't never seen such nursing," Doc Wilson remarked after Emma recovered. "These girls care for each other like true kin." The winter of 1881 brought heavy snow and lean times. Game grew scarce, forcing Charles to range further into the mountains to hunt. He taught the older girls to set snares for rabbits and to smoke meat properly. Sarah proved especially skilled at preserving food, carefully managing their stores to stretch through the cold months. "Waste not, want not," she'd remind her sisters, measuring out portions with careful precision. Inside their cabin, the girls developed their own rhythm of survival. Mary learned to patch boots with scraps of leather, her small fingers growing nimble with practice. Hannah mastered the art of bread making, kneading dough while teaching the younger ones their letters. Sophie became expert at spotting which wood would burn longest, while Beth showed a gift for calming frightened livestock during storms. Amelia, quiet as always, absorbed everything but spoke little. Her eyes seemed to hold something ancient, especially when she worked with herbs or tracked game. Unlike her sister's chatter, her movements were nearly silent, her observation constant. Though she joined in the work readily enough, there were moments when she would pause, her gaze drawn to the distant mountains as if hearing a call only she could understand. Spring of 1882 arrived gently, painting the ridge with wildflowers. The Boone cabin had become a familiar sight, its well-swept yard and neat vegetable patch speaking of care and industry. Smoke rose steadily from the chimney, while chickens scratched in the dirt and a milk cow grazed in the meadow. The girls' voices could often be heard singing hymns as they worked, their harmony sweet and true. When the county gathering was announced for May, Charles surprised them all with matching hair ribbons, pale blue silk ordered special from Denver. "Time folks saw you girls proper," he said gruffly, handing out the carefully wrapped package. "Been saving a bit here and there." The sisters spent hours helping each other prepare, braiding hair and pressing dresses. Even Amelia allowed Mary to weave the ribbon through her thick, dark braids, though her eyes remained distant, thoughtful. The gathering drew families from across 3 counties, filling the meadow near Timber Ridge with wagons and buggies. Tables groaned under covered dishes, while fiddle music filled the air. The Boone sisters drew attention immediately. 9 girls in neat calico dresses with matching ribbons, moving together like a flock of birds. "Hard to believe they're the same wild bunch old Boone brought to church that winter," Mrs. Potter remarked to her neighbor. "Look at how they've settled." When time came for the musical portion, the sisters took their places beneath the oak tree. Their voices rose pure and clear in amazing grace. The harmony so perfect, it brought tears to more than a few eyes. Charles watched from the edge of the crowd, his weathered face proud yet humble. Yet even in this moment of acceptance, whispers circulated like autumn leaves. Who were these girls really? Where had they come from? Why did Amelia's features seem so different from her sisters? The questions passed from person to person, soft but persistent. "Heard tell some might be Indian children," one woman murmured. "Nah, more likely orphan train strays," another countered. "Whatever they are, they're a credit to the county now," the preacher's wife said firmly, ending the speculation. As evening settled over the gathering, Charles collected his daughters for the walk home. The youngest, Beth, was nearly asleep on her feet, so he scooped her up in his arms. The other girls fell into step behind him, their ribbons glowing like fallen sky in the twilight. Stars began appearing overhead, brilliant in the mountain air. Charles paused on the trail, shifting Beth's weight slightly as he gazed up at the familiar constellations. His lips moved in silent prayer, gratitude evident in every line of his face. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered, just loud enough for the girls to hear. "For every one of these precious souls." The sisters walked on through the gathering darkness, their steps sure on the familiar path. Amelia lingered slightly behind, her face turned toward the western horizon where the last light was fading. Something pulled at her heart, a whispered memory perhaps, or an unasked question. She touched the blue ribbon in her hair, then hurried to catch up with her sisters, leaving her thoughts unspoken in the growing night. The cabin windows glowed warmly as they approached, smoke curling from the chimney into the star-filled sky. One by one, the girls filed inside, their voices soft with sleepiness as they prepared for bed. Charles tucked Beth into her quilts, then watched as his family settled into their nightly routine. The evening ended as so many had before, with prayer and the soft sound of breathing as the girls drifted off to sleep. Outside, an owl called into the darkness, while inside, the fire crackled low in the hearth. Another day on the ridge had drawn to a close, marking one more chapter in the story of the Boone family's life together. The spring of 1916 brought change to Timber Ridge, as surely as the mountain snows gave way to wildflowers. The town had grown since Charles Boone first arrived with his 9 daughters, though the old-timers still remembered that winter day. Now telegraph lines stretched between newly painted buildings, and motorcars occasionally rattled down the main street alongside horse-drawn wagons. The first sister arrived on the afternoon train from Denver. Mary Boone Patterson, now a respected nurse, stepped onto the platform wearing a crisp white traveling suit. Her dark hair had threads of silver, but her blue eyes remained sharp as ever. She paused, taking in the familiar peaks rising against the sky. "Why, if it ain't little Mary Boone," called Mr. Henderson from the depot, "though I reckon you ain't so little anymore." She smiled, touching the wooden pendant still hanging at her throat, a keepsake carved by Charles decades ago. "Timber Ridge has changed some," she observed, noting the electric lights being installed along Main Street. Rebecca arrived next, bringing her schoolteacher's sensibilities from Kansas City. Her wagon kicked up dust as she drove in from the station, her spine straight as always. The years of teaching had etched fine lines around her eyes, but she carried herself with the same quiet dignity Charles had instilled in them all. Sarah came from California, where she'd served as a missionary. The long journey showed in her tired eyes, but her face lit up at the sight of the mountains. Hannah followed shortly after, having left her wealthy Chicago home to return to her roots. Her fine clothes couldn't hide the frontier girl within. Emma drove in from her ranch 50 miles south, her face weathered from years working alongside her husband. Beth arrived from Wyoming, where she kept house for a doctor, though she'd never had children of her own. Sophie came last from Denver, her face bearing scars from the influenza that had nearly claimed her life years before. Only Margaret still lived in the old cabin, tending it as carefully as Charles once had. And Amelia, she'd never strayed far, making her home in a small house between town and the old Comanche territories, belonging fully to neither world. The sisters converged on the fairgrounds where banners proclaimed Timber Ridge Centennial, 1916. Townsfolk stopped to stare as the 9 women greeted each other with tears and laughter. Their resemblance to Charles was striking. Something in the set of their jaws, the way they carried themselves, the quiet strength in their bearing. "Land sakes," whispered Mrs. Potter to her daughter. "It's like seeing Charles Boone's spirit 9 times over." The sisters embraced, examining the changes time had wrought. Mary's hands, once small and uncertain, now moved with a nurse's confidence. Rebecca's voice carried the authority of countless lessons taught. Sarah's eyes held the wisdom of foreign shores, while Hannah's silk dress couldn't hide her frontier practicality. Emma's strong arms spoke of ranch work, Beth's gentle manner of caring for others' children since she couldn't have her own. Sophie's scars were worn proudly, like badges of survival. Margaret's calloused hands testified to years maintaining their father's legacy. And Amelia, her quiet grace bridged worlds, just as it always had. "Remember when Pa first brought us here?" Rebecca asked as they walked together. "Folk thought he was plumb crazy." 9 little girls and 1 mountain man, Sophie laughed. Reckoned they had cause to wonder. They made their way to the old cabin as evening approached. Margaret had kept it well, though weathering showed in the graying logs and worn steps. Inside, The familiar scents of wood smoke and pine brought memories flooding back. "I can almost hear Pa's boots on the porch," Hannah murmured, running her hand along the mantel he'd carved. Mary lit the old lantern, its glow warming the walls just as it had in their childhood. They gathered around the table, the very one Charles had built when 9 little girls needed feeding. Margaret served supper on their mother's dishes, preserved through decades of careful use. "Remember how Pa used to pray before every meal?" Sarah asked, her voice soft with memory. "Never forgot to thank the Lord, even in the leanest times." Outside, the centennial celebration continued. Fireworks burst against the darkening sky, their colors flooding through the windows. But inside the cabin, time seemed to fold back on itself. 9 women, once 9 little girls, shared bread and memories. "He taught us more than survival," Emma reflected, touching the wooden pendant they each still wore. "He taught us family ain't always about blood." Amelia nodded, her dark eyes distant. Of all of them, she'd carried the heaviest questions about belonging. Yet Charles had never treated her differently, had loved her with the same fierce devotion he'd given all his daughters. "Remember that first winter?" Beth asked. "How he'd tell stories by the fire until we fell asleep." "And sang hymns while we did chores," Margaret added. "Said work went easier with a song in your heart." The sisters spoke long into the night, sharing tales of their separate lives. Mary told of the patients she'd tended, Rebecca of the children she'd taught. Sarah described distant missions, while Hannah spoke of city life. Emma shared ranch stories. Beth told of her work with the doctor, and Sophie recounted her battle with influenza. Margaret spoke of maintaining their father's home, keeping his ways alive. Amelia listened more than she spoke, but when she did, her words carried the weight of one who had learned to walk between worlds. More fireworks burst outside, but the sisters barely noticed. The lantern's glow and shared memories wrapped them in warmth that felt like yesterday, like childhood, like home. In that moment, they were no longer 9 women, marked by time and experience. They were Charles Boone's girls, bound by love stronger than blood. Through the window came the sound of celebration, Timber Ridge marking its 100 years. But in the cabin, 9 sisters had already found what was worth celebrating. The family a rough mountain man had built with nothing but faith and love, the legacy that had shaped them all. The lantern flickered, casting familiar shadows on the walls. For a moment, they could almost see Charles sitting in his old chair by the fire, his weathered face proud as he watched his girls, now women, gathered once more under the roof he'd built to shelter them. Morning dawned bright over Timber Ridge, the July sun warming the fairgrounds where colorful banners snapped in the mountain breeze. The Boone sisters walked together through the centennial celebrations, their presence drawing attention like ripples in a pond. The fairgrounds buzzed with activity. Ladies arranged pies on gingham-covered tables while children darted between stalls selling candy and lemonade. The scent of coffee and fresh-baked bread wafted from the church lady's tent, mixing with the earthier smells of horses being readied for the afternoon races. "My word, if it ain't all 9 Boone girls," Mrs. Henderson called from behind a display of quilts. Her weathered hands smoothed a particularly fine example of star patchwork. "You remember when your pa first brought you to town?" "Seems like yesterday." Mary stepped forward, admiring the quilts with a nurse's eye for detail. "These are mighty fine, Mrs. Henderson. Reminds me of what Pa used to say about life being like a quilt, all sorts of pieces making something beautiful." Nearby, Rebecca paused to watch young boys racing stick horses, remembering her own students back in Kansas City. Sophie lingered by the pie contest tables, where women fussed over fruit-filled crusts and cream-topped confections. "Those Boone girls," a voice muttered just loud enough to hear. "Charles's strays, the lot of them." The words came from Mrs. Potter, who'd never approved of Charles raising 9 girls alone. The sisters exchanged glances but kept their heads high, just as their father had taught them. Hannah's silk dress rustled as she turned away, while Emma's calloused hands clenched briefly at her sides. "Pay it no mind," Sarah murmured, touching Amelia's arm. She could feel her sister's tension, the old hurt of never quite belonging rising fresh. The morning progressed with forced cheer. Beth admired babies in the cradle contest, hiding the ache of her childless years. Margaret chatted with old neighbors about the changes in Timber Ridge, while Amelia helped judge the horse races. her expertise quietly respected by the ranchers. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Mr. Whitaker, one of the town's eldest residents, approached them. His cane tapped a stern rhythm on the packed earth. "Ladies," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority, "might have a word?" The sisters gathered around him, aware of onlookers' curious stares. "There's some unfinished business concerning your father's land," he said, eyes sharp beneath bushy brows. "Papers filed back in '79 that need reviewing. Railroads got interest up that way now." Emma stepped forward, ranch wife practical. "Our pa's claim was legal and proper, Mr. Whitaker. He made sure of that." "Did he now?" Whitaker's tone held doubt. "Strange thing, raising 9 girls not his own. Stranger still, some of the guardianship papers. Railroad lawyers have questions." The festivities seemed to fade around them, joy draining from the day like water from a cracked cup. Margaret's face paled. She still lived in the cabin, tending their father's legacy. "We thank you for the warning," Mary said firmly, her nurse's authority clear. "If you'll excuse us." They walked away with measured steps, dignity intact, but tension thrummed between them like a plucked wire. The celebration continued around them, but they no longer felt part of it. Children still played. Horses thundered around the racetrack, and women compared preserves. But the sisters moved through it all like ghosts. As evening approached, they retreated to the cabin, seeking refuge in its familiar walls. Margaret lit the lamps while Beth set out cups for coffee. The old table gathered them close, just as it had in childhood. "Might as well speak plain," Emma said, her ranch-bred directness breaking the silence. "We all got stories to tell, and seems time we shared them." One by one, they opened their hearts. Mary spoke of her husband's support through nursing school, his pride in her work. Rebecca described teaching frontier children, finding purpose in shaping young minds. Sarah's voice trembled as she admitted her marriage had failed. Her husband couldn't understand her calling to mission work. "He wanted a wife to stay home, not one who'd travel to foreign lands," she explained, twisting her handkerchief. Hannah described her wealthy Chicago life, comfortable but somehow hollow. Emma spoke of ranch hardships weathered alongside her steadfast husband, while Beth's quiet words about her childless years brought tears to every eye. "Sometimes I stand in the schoolyard," Beth confessed, watching mothers with their little ones, wondering what might have been. Sophie touched her influenza scars, speaking of the doctor who'd tended her, now her husband. Margaret admitted to loneliness in the cabin sometimes, but fierce pride in maintaining their father's home. Then Amelia spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I've never fully belonged anywhere," she said. "Not in town, not with the Comanche. Even here sometimes." "Don't you say that," Mary interrupted, reaching for her hands. The others joined in, 9 pairs of hands clasped tight. "You're our sister," Rebecca insisted. "Pa chose each of us, made us family." "Blood don't matter," Emma added firmly. "Never did to Pa, never did to us." Amelia's eyes glistened in the lamplight. "I know that here," she touched her heart. "But sometimes—" A sharp knock at the door cut through the moment. Margaret rose to answer it, returning with a man in a neat black suit. "Edwin Pike," he introduced himself, hat in hand. "Representing the railroad company. My apologies for the late hour, but I must request your presence at the courthouse tomorrow morning. There are irregularities in your father's claim to this land." The sisters straightened in their chairs, 9 pairs of blue eyes and one dark, fixed on the lawyer's face. "What sort of irregularities?" Mary asked, her nurse's calm masking concern. Pike cleared his throat. "Questions about guardianship papers, property rights. The railroad has plans for this area, you understand? Best to settle things properly." His gaze lingered on Amelia before returning to the others. "We'll be there," Emma said firmly, standing. The others rose with her, a clear dismissal. After Pike left, silence filled the cabin. The lamp flickered, casting shadows on the walls Charles had built with his own hands. Outside, the last of the centennial celebrations echoed. Distant laughter, a stray firecracker, horses nickering in the dark. "Pa wouldn't want us to worry," Margaret said finally. "He taught us to face troubles together." "And that's just what we'll do," Mary agreed, her hand finding Amelia's again. The sisters looked at one another across the table, the evening's shared confidences binding them closer. Whatever the railroad planned, they would meet it as they had met every challenge since that long-ago winter day. Together, as Charles Boone's daughters. The courthouse loomed against the morning sky, its red brick facade stern and imposing. 9 sisters climbed the worn steps, their boots echoing in the hushed morning air. Inside, the oak-paneled courtroom smelled of dust and furniture polish. Light filtered through tall windows, catching motes in its beams. Edwin Pike stood at the prosecutor's table, arranging papers with precise movements. His black suit seemed to absorb the sunlight, creating a shadow even in the bright room. The sisters filed into the front bench, shoulders straight, chins lifted just as Charles had taught them. Judge Morrison entered, his robe swishing as he took his seat. The gavel's sharp crack brought the murmuring gallery to silence. Regarding the matter of the Boone homestead claim, the judge intoned, peering over his spectacles, "Mr. Pike, you may proceed." Pike rose smoothly, papers in hand. "Your Honor, the railroad company has uncovered serious irregularities in Charles Boone's original land claim." He approached the bench, presenting documents with flourish. "Records show no proper filing of ownership deeds in 1879. Without clear title, this land falls under railroad authority through prior territorial grants." Mary gripped Rebecca's hand. Margaret's face went pale. She'd been tending that land for decades. "Furthermore," Pike continued, "there are questions about Mr. Boone's guardianship arrangements." His gaze swept across the sisters, lingering meaningfully on Amelia. "The legality of his custody claims appears uncertain." Emma stood abruptly. "RPF filed every paper proper. He wouldn't leave things unsettled." "Order," Judge Morrison warned, tapping his gavel. "Mrs. Wheeler, please be seated." Sophie touched Emma's arm, guiding her back down. In the gallery, townspeople whispered. Mrs. Potter's disapproving sniff carried clearly. The judge examined Pike's documents, frowning. "These raise concerning questions. The railroad's claim appears substantive enough to warrant full proceedings." He looked up at the sisters. "Do you have counsel?" "We have truth, Your Honor," Mary answered, her nurse's authority carrying. "And we have our father's word." "Word alone won't suffice," Pike interjected smoothly. "The railway requires clear titles for development. Progress demands certainty." Judge Morrison nodded slowly. "I'm setting a hearing for next week. Both parties will present their evidence then." The gavel fell with finality. Court dismissed. The sisters emerged into harsh sunlight, blinking. Townspeople clustered on the courthouse steps, some offering sympathetic glances, others turning away. "Railroad means jobs," the blacksmith muttered to nodding neighbors. "Can't stop progress." "Shame about the girls," Mrs. Henderson whispered, "but perhaps it's for the best." Walking back to the cabin, the sisters moved close together, as they had so many times before. Storm clouds gathered over the mountains, matching their dark thoughts. Margaret unlocked the cabin door with trembling hands. Inside, the familiar walls seemed suddenly fragile. The legacy they'd thought secure now threatened. "We'll fight this," Emma declared, pacing the plank floor. "Pa wouldn't have left us vulnerable." Thunder rolled in the distance. Amelia stood by the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Her shoulders shook once, then again. "Amelia?" Beth touched her arm. "What is it? I know why the papers might be irregular." Amelia's voice came soft, weighted with long-held secrets. She turned, tears tracking down her cheeks. "Pa told me, years ago, about where I came from." The sisters gathered close, sensing the importance of the moment. Lightning flickered, illuminating their concerned faces. "I'm not like you," Amelia continued. "Not really. Pa found me. After a cavalry raid on a Comanche camp." Her words tumbled out, released at last. "My mother was Comanche. She didn't survive. Pa hid my true heritage to protect me from the soldiers, from anyone who might." She couldn't continue. Shock rippled through the room. Hannah gasped. Sarah pressed a hand to her mouth. The storm outside grew fiercer, rain now lashing the windows. "That's why Pike looked at me that way," Amelia sobbed. "He knows. Or suspects. And now I'm the reason we might lose everything." She sank to her knees, shoulders heaving. Pa's land, his legacy, all at risk because of what I am. For one heartbeat, silence held. Then Mary moved first, kneeling beside Amelia. The others followed, surrounding their sister in a tight circle. "No," Mary said firmly, "you're our sister. Nothing changes that." "Pa chose us all," Rebecca added, her voice fierce, "made us family with love, not paper." Sophie reached for Amelia's hand. "Remember what he taught us? Family is what God places in your arms." "You're a boon," Emma declared, "same as any of us." Hannah smoothed Amelia's hair. "More than blood makes kinship." "Pa knew that," Margaret said softly. "Why, he loved us all the same." Sarah wiped tears from Amelia's cheeks. "Your heritage is beautiful, sister, not shameful." "We'll fight together," Beth promised, like always. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, 9 sisters held each other close, their bond stronger than blood, deeper than paper claims, more lasting than any storm. Amelia looked up at her sisters through tears. "But what if Pike finds proof? What if—" "Then we face it," Mary interrupted, "together." "Pa protected you for a reason," Emma added. "Now it's our turn." Thunder crashed overhead, but none of them flinched. They'd weathered storms before since that first winter when Charles brought them together. Now, in the cabin he'd built, his daughters drew strength from each other, just as he'd taught them. "Tell us more," Sophie urged gently, "about what Pa said." Amelia wiped her eyes. "He told me late one night when I was 16. I'd been feeling different, questioning." She drew a shaky breath. "He said he found me after the raid, just a tiny baby. Said my mother had hidden me under blankets, giving her life to save mine." The sisters listened, hearts aching, as Amelia continued. "He knew taking me would be complicated, but he said—" She smiled through tears. "He said the moment I grabbed his finger, he knew I was meant to be his daughter." "That's Pa," Margaret whispered, "seeing God's plan in everything." "He kept it secret," Amelia explained, "because those were dangerous times. Soldiers still hunting, people taking revenge. He filed papers claiming I was orphaned, like the rest. But he always meant to tell me the truth." "He protected you," Mary said firmly, "like any father would. And now we'll protect you," Emma added, "and the land." Lightning flashed again, but its harsh light only emphasized their unity. 9 sisters, bound by love rather than blood, stronger together than any storm or legal threat. "Pike can't understand," Rebecca said. "Men like him see only paper and profit." "But we know better," Sarah added. "We know what real family means." The storm began to ease, its fury spending itself against the mountains. But inside the cabin, 9 sisters remained close, their circle unbroken. Each touch, each murmured word of comfort, reaffirmed the bond Charles had forged between them all those years ago. Amelia looked around at her sisters, different in their lives and choices, but united in their love. "Pa would be proud," she whispered, "seeing us now." "He is proud," Mary corrected gently, watching over us still. Outside, the rain softened to a steady patter, washing the world clean. Inside, 9 sisters held fast to each other and their father's legacy of love, a legacy stronger than any deed, more precious than any land claim, more enduring than any storm. Morning light filtered through the cabin windows as Mary spread papers across the worn kitchen table. Receipts yellowed with age, letters carefully preserved, and Charles's old Bible lay before them. The sisters gathered around, determination etched on their faces. "Here's the tax receipt from 1879, Rebecca said, smoothing a crinkled paper. "Pa always paid on time." Margaret nodded, her fingers tracing the faded ink. "And the building permits for the barn addition in 1882. Sophie carefully turned pages in Charles's Bible, where dates and notes filled the margins. "Look here. He recorded when each of us came to him. Dates, circumstances, everything." "Pa was more careful than folks knew," Emma added, sorting through a stack of correspondence. "These letters from the territorial office show he inquired about proper procedures." The morning sun climbed higher as they worked, casting long shadows across the floorboards. Hannah brought coffee while Beth arranged the documents in chronological order. Their shared purpose filled the cabin with quiet energy. "The preacher might remember details," Sarah suggested. "He was here from the beginning." Mary straightened, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Good thinking. We should speak with Reverend Thompson today." Outside, wagon wheels creaked as townspeople passed, heading to the mercantile. Through the open window came snippets of conversation about the railroad case. Some voices carried judgment, others defended Charles's reputation. "Did you hear?" Mrs. Henderson's voice drifted in. "They say Charles Boone might have stolen that land outright." "Now, Martha," Mr. Potter responded, "that ain't fair. Man took in 9 orphans when nobody else would." The sisters exchanged glances, their bond strengthening against outside doubt. Amelia stood by the window, her face troubled but resolute. "I need to speak my truth," she said quietly. "About who I am, about Pa's protection." Mary crossed to her, touching her shoulder. "Are you certain?" "Some folks won't understand." "They need to know Pa's heart," Amelia replied. "How he saved me, saved all of us." The sisters nodded, understanding the risk and courage in her decision. Emma squeezed Amelia's hand. "We'll stand with you." By midday, they walked together to the church, documents carefully bundled. Reverend Thompson welcomed them into his study, his kind face creased with concern. "Of course I remember," he said, settling into his chair. "Your father came to me first, seeking guidance about raising you girls proper." "Did he discuss the land arrangements?" Mary asked. The preacher nodded slowly. "Charles was meticulous about it, wanted everything done right and legal. He shuffled through his own papers. I helped him draft letters to the land office myself." Hope brightened the sisters' faces, but their victory was short-lived as they stepped out into town later that afternoon. Amelia had insisted on speaking with the sheriff about her heritage, hoping to demonstrate Charles's honorable intentions. The sheriff's office fell silent as they entered. Deputy Wilson's hand twitched toward his gun belt before he caught himself. The sisters drew closer together, protective. "So it's true then?" Sheriff Brooks asked, studying Amelia. "You're Indian?" "Comanche," Amelia said firmly. "My father saved me as a baby, raised me as his own." The silence grew heavy. Through the window they could see townsfolk gathering, word spreading quickly. "Savage blood," someone muttered outside. "No wonder Charles kept it quiet." Amelia's shoulders stiffened, but her voice remained steady. "My father was a good man. He protected me out of love, not shame." They left the office with heads held high, but Amelia trembled once they reached the cabin. Her sisters surrounded her immediately, offering comfort and strength. "You showed such courage," Mary whispered, holding her close. "They needed to hear it," Sophie added, "even if they're not ready to understand." As evening approached, Margaret laid fabric across the table, calico in soft blues and browns. "Remember how Pa had us wear matching dresses that first Sunday?" The sisters smiled at the memory. Hannah ran her fingers over the material. "We should do the same for the fair. Show them we're still united." 9 dresses, Beth said, reaching for scissors, just like always. They worked into the night, lamps casting warm pools of light as they measured and cut. The familiar rhythm of needles and thread brought comfort. Each stitch seemed to bind them closer, echoing Charles's lessons about family and faith. Pa used to say presentation matters, Emma recalled, pinning a hem. "Show the world your dignity, girls." Sarah threaded another needle. "Remember how he'd check our ribbons before church." "And polish our shoes," Rebecca added, smiling. The cabin filled with such memories as they sewed, Charles teaching them to read by lamplight, his prayers over simple suppers, his quiet pride in their accomplishments. Outside, crickets chirped in the gathering dusk. "We should add pockets," Margaret suggested, "like the ones Pa put in our first dresses." "For collecting pretty stones," Hannah remembered fondly. "And carrying biscuits to share," Beth added. Amelia sat quietly, her needle moving steadily. Finally, she spoke. "When Pa told me about my mother, he said she'd sewn a medicine pouch for me, said it showed her love, even though we never met." The sisters paused in their work, touched by this revelation. Mary reached across the table to clasp Amelia's hand. "Then we'll sew that love into these dresses too," she said softly. "Every stitch a memory, every seam a bond between us." They worked late into the night, their lamps burning steady. The pile of finished dresses grew, each one carefully crafted, each a testament to their unity. When they finally paused, the cabin smelled of cotton and coffee, of hope and determination. The dresses lay finished in the lamplight, 9 identical symbols of their bond. Blue like the morning glory flowers Charles had planted by the porch, brown like the earth he'd taught them to tend. Simple but dignified, like the life he'd given them. "For Pa," Emma said softly, touching the nearest dress. "For each other," Mary added. "For family," Amelia whispered. The lamps flickered, casting their warm glow over the scene. 9 sisters, 9 dresses, and countless threads of love binding them together. Outside, the mountains stood dark against the star-filled sky, as steady and unchanging as Charles's legacy in their hearts. Beth gathered scraps of fabric, tucking them away carefully. "Nothing wasted," she said, just as Charles had taught them. Hannah straightened the dresses, smoothing each fold. "We'll wear these proud." "Like Pa taught us," Sophie agreed. The cabin held them close, its familiar walls echoing with years of memories. Charles's presence seemed to fill the space, in the tools he'd hung with care, in the verses he'd carved above the hearth, in the love that still bound his daughters together. Margaret lit one more lamp as they prepared for bed. Its gentle light caught the gleam of needles, the shine of scissors, the soft folds of their newly made dresses. 9 pieces of fabric transformed by love and determination into something stronger, just as Charles had transformed 9 abandoned girls into a family bound by more than blood. "Rest now," Mary said softly. "Tomorrow brings its own work." They settled onto their quilts, the cabin growing quiet except for the gentle crackle of the dying fire. Their dresses hung ready, each stitch a testament to their unity, each seam strengthened by shared purpose and love. Morning sunlight painted Timber Ridge in golden hues as flags and banners fluttered in the breeze. The fairgrounds hummed with activity. Children racing between stalls, women arranging pies on checkered cloths, men setting up wooden platforms for the evening's entertainment. The scent of coffee and fresh-baked bread wafted from the church lady's tent. The 9 Boone sisters stood together near their father's restored cabin, their matching blue and brown dresses catching the early light. Mary smoothed her skirt, checking that each detail was perfect. They had spent weeks preparing the cabin exhibit, transforming the weathered structure into a testament of Charles Boone's legacy. "Remember how Pa would polish the lantern glass every Saturday?" Hannah asked, adjusting one on the porch rail. "Said a clean light shines brightest," Sophie replied, carefully arranging Charles's hand-carved animals on a shelf inside. The cabin's interior glowed with memories. Colorful quilts draped the walls, each stitch telling stories of winter nights spent sewing by the fire. Charles's wooden keepsakes, the small carved horses, bears, and birds he'd made for each daughter, stood proudly on display. His old Bible lay open on the table, well-worn pages marked with pressed flowers. Emma hung the last quilt, stepping back to admire their work. "Pa would have been proud of this. He was always proud of us," Rebecca said softly, touching the Bible's leather cover. People began gathering outside, drawn by curiosity. Mrs. Henderson, who had once doubted Charles's ability to raise 9 girls alone, pressed a handkerchief to her eyes as she studied the careful arrangements. "I remember when you girls first came," she said, voice thick with emotion. "Such tiny things, but so dignified. Charles taught you well." The blacksmith's wife nodded, pointing to a carved wooden horse. "That's Timothy's work, all right. Nobody could capture a horse's spirit in wood like Charles Boone." More townspeople filtered through, exclaiming over familiar items. Old Mr. Potter recognized tools Charles had borrowed and returned, always in better condition. The preacher's wife found the hymnal she'd given them that first Christmas. "Look here," Reverend Thompson called out, indicating Charles's journal displayed under glass. His daily prayers for each daughter, written faithful as sunrise. Amelia stood quietly by the fireplace where Charles had first told her the truth of her heritage. Her sisters moved closer, their presence steady and strong. The morning stretched into afternoon as visitors continued exploring the exhibit. Children touched the quilts with gentle fingers, asking about the patterns. Elderly residents shared memories of Charles helping during harsh winters or drought seasons. "Never saw him turn away anyone in need," the miller remarked, even when his own stores were low. As evening approached, lanterns were lit across the fairgrounds. The sisters gathered on the platform where a piano waited. Mary nodded to the others, and their voices rose together in "Great is thy faithfulness." The hymn Charles had taught them that first year? Great is thy faithfulness, O God my Father. The familiar words floated across the ridge, carrying years of memories. Their harmonies, practiced in childhood around the cabin's fire, blended perfectly. Even those who had come to scoff found themselves wiping away tears. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. Mr. Potter removed his hat, remembering Charles singing this same hymn while mending fences. The blacksmith's wife clutched her husband's arm, recalling the 9 little girls in patched dresses, voices strong and true. All I have needed thy hand hath provided. Near the back of the crowd, Edwin Pike, the railroad lawyer, watched with cold calculation. His fingers tapped against his briefcase, but even his stern expression softened slightly at the pure sound of their voices. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. As the last note faded into the mountain air, silence held for a heartbeat before applause erupted. The town mayor stepped forward, his voice carrying across the gathering. Charles Boone showed us what it means to live by faith and hard work, he declared. His legacy stands before us in these 9 remarkable women. This cabin will remain a testament to his vision and courage. More applause followed. The sisters accepted congratulations with grace, though their eyes occasionally drifted to Pike's shadowy figure at the crowd's edge. Later, as the fair's activities wound down, the 9 sisters sat together on the cabin's porch. Lantern light spilled through the windows, reminding them of countless evening meals shared around Charles's table. Remember the night Pa tried to make sourdough bread? Beth laughed softly. 3 tries before it rose proper, Sarah recalled, smiling. But he never gave up, Sophie added, said anything worth doing was worth doing right. They fell quiet, watching the stars emerge above the ridge. The same stars Charles had taught them to navigate by, the same mountains that had sheltered their unlikely family. He gave us more than survival, Mary mused. He gave us dignity, purpose, and each other, Amelia added softly. The sisters nodded, their bond tangible in the evening air. From the fairgrounds came the distant sound of fiddles and laughter, but here on the porch, time seemed to pause. Each sister lost in memories of suppers by lamplight, of Charles's quiet prayers, of 9 little girls becoming a family. Margaret touched the porch rail where Charles's hand had smoothed the wood. Every nail, every board, he built this place for us to belong. To thrive, Hannah agreed. Emma glanced toward town where lights twinkled in windows. He taught us to face whatever comes together. They sat a while longer, sharing remembered snippets of childhood. Charles teaching them to read by firelight, showing them which plants could heal, how to track deer through fresh snow. Each memory strengthened their resolve for the challenges ahead. In town, Edwin Pike sat at his desk, surrounded by legal documents. The sisters' song still echoed in his mind as he reviewed his strategy, but he pushed the melody away. Progress, he reminded himself, couldn't be held back by sentiment. The moon rose higher, casting silver light across the ridge. In the cabin, the carefully arranged artifacts stood witness to a life well lived. Charles's tools, his carvings, his Bible. Outside, his daughters remained on the porch, their matching dresses now shades of blue-black in the darkness, their bond stronger than ever. The day's triumph had brought a measure of peace, but they knew it was only a moment's respite. Still, as they sat together in the growing dark, they felt Charles's presence in every board of the cabin, every star above the ridge, every breath of mountain air. Here they had learned love was stronger than blood. Here they had become sisters. Here they would make their stand. The morning sun cast long shadows through the courthouse windows as people filed into the cramped room. The Boone sisters sat together in the front row, their fair dresses from yesterday replaced by simple cotton ones. Their shoulders touched, drawing strength from each other. Edwin Pike strode in, his boots clicking against the wooden floor. His leather briefcase gleamed with polish, matching his carefully groomed appearance. He arranged papers on the counsel table with precise movements, occasionally glancing at the sisters with calculated indifference. Judge Harrison entered, his black robe sweeping behind him. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced. The room settled into tense silence. Pike rose smoothly, adjusting his vest. "Your Honor, I have new evidence concerning the Boone property claim." He withdrew several yellowed documents from his briefcase. These records show Charles Boone was nothing more than a squatter, occupying railroad land unlawfully. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Mary Boone, the eldest, gripped Sophie's hand. They had expected opposition, but not this. The documents are dated 1878, Pike continued, passing them to the judge. They clearly show the railroad's prior claim to the Ridge property. Charles Boone simply moved in without legal right or title. Judge Harrison examined the papers, his expression grave. The sisters exchanged worried glances. Hannah, who had helped Charles with his correspondence, shook her head slightly. Furthermore, Pike added, we have testimony from former railway surveyors confirming the land was marked for development before Boone's arrival. Rebecca Boone stood suddenly. That's impossible. Our father chose that land careful and proper. He filed his claim. Order, Judge Harrison warned, tapping his gavel. Miss Boone, you'll have your chance to speak. Pike's smile didn't reach his eyes. I sympathize with the sisters' attachment to the property. However, sentiment cannot override legal fact. These documents prove Charles Boone knew he was trespassing on railroad land. More whispers filled the courtroom. The sisters saw several townspeople nodding, their former support wavering. Your Honor, Mary began, we request time to examine these supposed documents. Of course, Pike interrupted smoothly, though I doubt it will change the facts. However, while we're addressing truth, he turned toward Amelia. Perhaps Miss Amelia Boone would care to explain her own unique situation? Amelia felt her sister stiffen beside her. The room grew painfully quiet. Miss Boone, Pike continued, would you please take the stand? Amelia rose slowly, her dark hair and high cheekbones marking her different heritage more clearly than ever. She felt every eye in the courtroom following her progress to the witness chair. After she was sworn in, Pike approached. Miss Boone, you claim to be Charles Boone's daughter? I am his daughter, Amelia replied quietly but firmly. By blood? By love and raising. Pike's smile tightened. But you are, in fact, Comanche by birth? The word seemed to echo in the silent courtroom. Someone gasped. Amelia lifted her chin slightly. My mother was Comanche. My father was Charles Boone. Your biological father? My true father, Amelia answered, her voice steady. He saved me as a baby, raised me as his own. Pike paced before the bench. So Charles Boone took you without legal adoption papers? He protected me, Amelia said. There were soldiers then hunting. Yes or no, Miss Boone, did Charles Boone have legal right to claim you as his child? Amelia's hands twisted in her lap. He saved my life. Another case of Charles Boone taking what wasn't legally his, Pike declared. First railroad land, then a child. Objection. Mary stood, face flushed. This is cruel and irrelevant. Judge Harrison raised his hand. Mr. Pike, your point? Simply this, Your Honor. The sisters claimed Charles Boone was an honest man who would never occupy land unlawfully. Yet here sits proof he was willing to skirt the law when it suited him. He kept this woman's true heritage hidden for decades. What else did he hide? The courtroom erupted in mixed reactions. Some people shouted support for the sisters. Others muttered darkly about deception. Amelia sat very still, her face composed despite the tears threatening to fall. She's probably been lying to gain sympathy, someone called from the back. Indians can't be trusted. Order! Judge Harrison's gavel crashed down. This court will maintain civility. But the damage was done. Amelia saw former friends avoiding her eyes, saw the doubt spreading through the room like poison. Your Honor, Pike said smoothly, I move that all claims by the Boone sisters be suspended pending full investigation of these documents and Charles Boone's legal status regarding both property and guardianship. Judge Harrison studied the papers before him. Given this new evidence, I'm inclined to agree. The sisters will have 1 week to provide proof of legal ownership. Until then, all claims are held in abeyance. His gavel fell with finality. The sisters sat frozen as the courtroom emptied. Pike packed his briefcase, satisfaction evident in every movement. Townspeople filed out, some offering sympathetic glances, others hurrying past with averted eyes. Finally, only the 9 sisters remained in the heavy silence. Sarah reached for Amelia's hand, but Amelia pulled away, standing abruptly. I'm sorry, she whispered. I've ruined everything. "No," Mary said firmly, "this isn't your fault." But Amelia was already moving, hurrying from the courthouse into the bright morning light that seemed to mock their darkness. Her sisters followed, calling her name, but she walked faster, nearly running by the time she reached the cabin. Inside, the carefully arranged exhibits from yesterday's triumph felt like accusations. Charles's carved animals watched as Amelia began gathering her things, her movements jerky with suppressed emotion. "What are you doing?" Emma demanded from the doorway. "Leaving," Amelia said, not turning around. "I should have left years ago. I'm not really one of you. I never was." "Stop that right now." Rebecca's voice cracked like a whip. "You're our sister." "You heard them," Amelia's voice broke. "I'm the reason we'll lose everything. Pa hid me, lied for me, and now—" "He protected you," Hannah interrupted, "like he protected all of us. And now his reputation is ruined because of me." Amelia turned, tears finally spilling. "The railroad will win because I'm proof Pa broke the law. Everything he built, everything he loved." "You are everything he loved," Mary said quietly. "You and all of us. Together." The other sisters crowded into the cabin surrounding Amelia. Sophie took the bundle from her hands while Margaret blocked the door. "Pa chose us," Beth reminded her. "Every one of us. He chose love over law when the law was wrong. And we're choosing you," Sarah added, "like we always have." Amelia's shoulders shook as her sisters embraced her. Outside, the mountain wind carried distant sounds of the town continuing its celebration, unaware of the pain in the small cabin. Inside, 9 women held each other, their unity tested but unbroken. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, illuminating the artifacts of their shared past. Charles's Bible, his carved creatures, the quilts they'd made together. These precious things seemed to witness their pain and their strength, just as they had witnessed so many other moments in this cabin. "We'll fight," Mary said finally. "We'll find a way to prove Pa's claim was legal." "And if we can't," Amelia whispered, "then we'll face that together too," Rebecca answered. "But we won't let you carry this alone." The sisters sat in the growing shadows, their fair triumph soured but their bond holding. Each lost in thoughts of Charles, his quiet strength, his unwavering love, his choice to make family from fragments the world had discarded. Tomorrow would bring new battles. Pike's forged documents waited to be challenged. Prejudices old as the mountains themselves had to be faced. But tonight, in the cabin Charles Boone had built with love and faith, 9 sisters kept their vigil together as they had so many nights before. Dawn brought determination to the Boone cabin. The sisters gathered around the worn kitchen table, their faces tight with resolve despite the sleepless night. Mary spread out a sheet of paper, her schoolteacher's hand steady as she wrote. "We have 6 days," she said, marking the date. "We need to search everywhere Pa might have filed papers." Rebecca nodded, her nurse's efficiency showing as she organized their plan. "The county seat will have land records. We should check the territorial office too." "I'll ride to Prairie Junction," Sarah offered, already reaching for her coat. "The courthouse there might have copies of the original deeds." The sisters divided tasks quickly, years of working together making the planning smooth. Emma would telegraph her husband's lawyer friends in Denver. Hannah and Beth would visit the oldest ranchers in the valley, hoping to find witnesses to Charles' early claims. Margaret and Sophie would search the cabin again, looking for any papers Charles might have hidden. "What about me?" Amelia asked quietly from her corner. The sisters exchanged glances. Mary stepped forward, taking Amelia's hands in hers. "Stay here, sister. Keep the home fires burning. We'll need a place to come back to." Amelia's dark eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. "I should do more. This trouble started because of me." "No," Rebecca said firmly. "This started because the railroad wants our land. Nothing more." The sisters prepared quickly, gathering supplies for their separate journeys. Sarah checked her mare's saddle, while Emma hurried to the telegraph office. Hannah and Beth borrowed the minister's buggy, planning to visit 3 ranches before sunset. The morning air was crisp with early spring chill as they scattered to their tasks. Amelia stood on the cabin porch watching her sisters disappear in different directions. The town below was just waking, smoke rising from chimneys as shopkeepers opened their doors. She felt exposed suddenly, aware of curious eyes watching from windows. Inside the cabin, Margaret and Sophie worked methodically. They checked every floorboard for loose nails, every ceiling beam for hidden spaces. Charles had been careful with important papers. Surely he'd left something to protect them. "Look at this," Sophie called, holding up a stack of letters from behind a loose brick in the hearth. But they were only old correspondence, nothing about land claims. The morning wore into afternoon. Amelia tried to help search, but her hands shook too much. Finally, she put on her shawl. "I'm going to the church," she said softly. Margaret looked up from examining an old trunk. "Want company?" "No." Amelia managed a small smile. I need to talk to God alone." The church stood empty and quiet, sunlight streaming through its simple windows. Amelia's footsteps echoed as she walked down the aisle where she'd first entered Timber Ridge with Charles and her sisters so many years ago. She knelt in the front pew, bowing her head. "Lord," she whispered, "am I truly where I belong? Pa saved me, raised me, loved me. But maybe I'm not meant to stay." Tears fell freely now, spotting her dress. "If I leave, maybe the sisters can prove their claim. Without me to remind everyone about Pa breaking the law." Her voice broke. "I don't want to hurt them anymore." "God doesn't make mistakes, child," Amelia startled. Reverend Thompson stood in the doorway, his kind face solemn. "I'm sorry," she began, rising. "I didn't mean to intrude." "This is God's house," he said, walking forward. "You belong here as much as anyone." He sat in the pew beside her. "I remember when Charles first brought you girls to church. 9 little souls, all different, all precious." "But I was different," Amelia whispered. "Am different." "Yes," the minister nodded. "And Charles loved you for exactly who you are. He told me once that God gave him 9 chances to learn about love, each of you teaching him something new about the Lord's grace." Fresh tears spilled down Amelia's cheeks. "What did I teach him?" "That love sees no boundaries." Reverend Thompson's voice was gentle. "That family is more than blood. That God's children come in all colors, speaking all tongues, but bearing the same divine spark." He patted her hand. "Charles chose you, Amelia, chose to love you, protect you, raise you as his own. That choice wasn't against the law. It was above it, following a higher law of love." Meanwhile, Sarah's horse struggled through muddy roads toward Prairie Junction. The spring thaw had turned the trail treacherous, forcing her to pick her way carefully. What should have been a 3-hour ride was taking twice that. In the telegraph office, Emma waited anxiously as messages clicked back and forth. The operator's face remained neutral as he translated the dots and dashes, but each response seemed to bring less hope than the last. Hannah and Beth found old Jim Tucker on his porch, remembering Charles well, but unable to recall specific documents. "Fine, man," he said, rocking slowly. "Worked hard. Kept to himself mostly, except about those girls of his. Loved them something fierce." At the second ranch, the widow Carson served them tea but had no helpful information. The third ranch yielded only a vague memory of Charles discussing water rights years ago. The sun was setting when the sisters began returning to the cabin. They found Amelia there, laying out a simple supper of bread and stew. One by one, they reported their findings, or lack thereof. "The courthouse in Prairie Junction burned in '82, Sarah said, exhausted from her long ride. "Most records were lost." Emma shook her head. "The Denver lawyers say territorial papers from that time are scattered. It could take weeks to search them all." "Tucker and the others remember Pa," Beth added, "but none saw any deeds." They ate quietly, the lantern casting long shadows on the cabin walls. Margaret and Sophie had found nothing in their thorough search of the house. The day's hope had dwindled with the light. "We'll try again tomorrow," Mary said firmly. "We have 5 days left." Amelia served coffee in the cups they'd used since childhood. "Reverend Thompson talked to me today," she said softly, "about Pa's choice to keep me." "There was no choice to it," Rebecca replied. "You were his daughter from the moment he found you. Same as all of us." "That's what the Reverend said." Amelia's voice strengthened slightly. "That Pa followed a higher law than man's rules." The sisters nodded, understanding flowing between them. They had always known this truth, that their family was built on love stronger than any legal document. The lantern burned low as night deepened. Outside, a coyote called lonely across the ridge. Inside, 9 sisters held to their faith in each other, in Charles's love, in God's purpose for their unusual family. Tomorrow would bring new searches, new hopes. For now, they kept their vigil together as they had so many nights before. Mary laid out fresh paper, planning tomorrow's tasks. Some would visit the land office in Clear Creek. Others would search church records, hoping for proof of Charles's guardianship. The work would be slow, the odds long, but they would not give up. Sarah mended her riding gloves by lamplight, preparing for another long journey. Emma composed more telegrams to send at first light. The others made lists of people to question, places to search. Through it all, Amelia moved quietly among her sisters, serving, listening, drawing strength from their unshakable acceptance. The Reverend's words echoed in her heart. Love sees no boundaries. Family is more than blood. God's children come in all colors. The night grew deeper. Hope flickered like the lantern's flame, uncertain but refusing to die. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they were together, 9 sisters bound by a father's love and their own unshakable faith in each other. The spring rain drummed steadily against the cabin roof as Sarah's horse appeared through the morning mist. 2 days of anxious waiting had left the sisters worn, but they rushed to the porch at the sound of hoofbeats. Sarah's face, though tired from hard riding, bore a hint of triumph. "I found something," she called, dismounting with papers clutched protectively beneath her coat. Her boots were caked with mud, her skirts splattered from the journey, but her eyes shone bright. Inside the cabin, the sisters gathered around the weathered table where they'd shared so many meals. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she spread out the documents, carefully dried and preserved by the county clerk. "It took hours of searching," she explained, smoothing the yellowed pages. "The clerk remembered Pa because he'd come in so early that morning, before anyone else. Said Pa insisted on filing right away." Emma leaned forward, adjusting the lamp to better see the formal script. "What are they?" "Guardianship papers," Sarah's voice caught. "For all of us. Every single one. Pa filed them that first winter, just weeks after bringing us to church." A collective gasp filled the room. Margaret reached for the papers with trembling fingers, reading aloud. "I, Charles Boone, do hereby claim guardianship of these 9 children, to raise as my own daughters." Her voice broke. Rebecca pressed close, pointing to the careful list of names. "Look, he wrote all of us down, even our birth dates, what he knew of them." Amelia stood slightly apart, hands clasped tight. Her sisters parted, making space for her at the table. With gentle care, Sophie pushed the papers toward her. There, in Charles's rough but determined hand, was her name. Amelia Boone, infant daughter, found 17th of October, 1879. Below it, his signature stood firm and clear, witnessed by the county judge. "He claimed me," Amelia whispered, touching the words. "Legally. From the very beginning." Tears spilled down her cheeks as decades of uncertainty washed away. Mary wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Of course he did. He claimed all of us." But why didn't he tell us?" Beth wondered, wiping her own eyes. "All these years we never knew." Hannah picked up another page, reading carefully. "Look what he wrote here, in his statement to the judge. These girls are bound to me not by law but by love. I file these papers only to protect their future, not to prove their worth as my daughters. That was proven the moment God placed them in my care." Silence fell as the sisters absorbed their father's words. Outside, the rain softened to a gentle patter, like tears of relief. "Pa knew," Sophie said softly. "He knew someday we might need proof, but he wanted us to trust in love, not legal papers." "That sounds just like him," Rebecca agreed. "Always thinking ahead, but never wanting us to worry." Sarah sank into a chair, exhaustion finally catching up. "The clerk said Pa came back every few years to make sure the papers were still safe. Never told a soul about them. Just kept watching over us, even in this." Emma began making coffee, the familiar routine a comfort as they processed the discovery. The old cups clinked against saucers, the sound echoing with memories of countless family suppers. "We should eat," Mary decided, practical as always. She moved to the stove where soup had been simmering. "We'll need our strength for tomorrow." As they gathered around the table, the papers carefully set aside, Amelia brought out the bread she'd baked that morning. Steam rose from their bowls as Sophie said grace, her voice steady, despite tears still shining in her eyes. "Thank you, Lord, for Pa's wisdom, for his love, for bringing us together as sisters." They ate slowly, savoring each bite as they had when Charles still sat at the head of the table. Stories flowed between them, memories of his quiet strength, his patient teaching, his unwavering faith in their family's bonds. "Remember how he carved each of us that little wooden horse?" Beth smiled. "Said every girl should have something that was just hers." "And how he'd read from the Bible every night," Hannah added, "even when he was bone-tired from working." "The way he'd just listen," Amelia said softly. "Never judging, never pushing, just listening until you found your own answer." As evening settled over the ridge, they cleared the dishes together, moving in the comfortable rhythm of long practice. The lamp cast a warm glow as they prepared for the next day's confrontation. Mary spread the guardianship papers on the table again, organizing them carefully. "We'll need to present these properly. Show the court Pa's foresight, his dedication to doing right by us." "The railroad lawyer won't give up easily," Emma warned. "He'll try to find some flaw, some way to dismiss these." "Let him try." Sarah's voice was steel beneath silk. "These papers are proper and legal." Pa made sure of that. They worked late into the night, reviewing the documents, planning their presentation. Each sister had a role to play. Mary would speak first, laying out their case. Emma would handle any legal questions, while Hannah would testify about Charles's character and care. Amelia sat quietly with the papers, memorizing every word. Each stroke of Charles's signature seemed to speak his love anew. He had claimed her, claimed all of them, not just in his heart, but before law and God. As midnight approached, they prepared for bed as they had so many times before. The old quilts still covered their beds, faded but sturdy as the bonds between them. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Rebecca said, banking the fire, "we face it together, as Pa taught us." "As sisters," Sophie agreed, hanging up her shawl. "As family," Amelia added softly, touching the papers one last time before Mary put them safely away. They rose before dawn the next morning, dressing with care in their best dresses. The rain had cleared, leaving the air fresh and clean. Birds called from the ridge as they ate a simple breakfast of porridge and coffee. Mary gathered the precious documents, wrapping them securely. Emma checked her notes one final time. The others moved about the cabin, straightening, tidying, drawing strength from familiar tasks. Amelia stood on the porch watching the sun rise over Timber Ridge. The town below was coming awake, smoke rising from chimneys, shutters opening to the day. Somewhere down there, the railroad lawyer was preparing his arguments, confident in his power to dismiss their claim. But she felt steady now, anchored by the truth they'd discovered. Charles Boone had not just been a good man taking in strays. He had been a father, deliberate and determined in his love, ensuring his daughter's future even while teaching them to trust in bonds stronger than paper. Her sisters joined her on the porch, 9 women strong in their unity. Without words, they joined hands as they had so many times before. Their prayers rose silent but fierce in the morning light. Then, gathering their courage and their evidence, the Boone sisters set out for the courthouse, ready to defend their father's legacy and their rightful place as his daughters. The town was waiting. The judge would be listening, and the railroad lawyer would fight hard. But they carried Charles's written claim with them now. Proof of what they had always known in their hearts, that love had made them family, and family would see them through. The morning sun cast long shadows through the courthouse windows as people filed in, filling every available space. The Boone sisters sat together in the front row, their matching dresses a statement of unity. Mary held the leather folder containing Charles's guardianship papers close to her chest, like a shield against uncertainty. Timber Ridge had never seen such a crowd. Ranchers stood along the walls, their hats held respectfully in weathered hands. Shopkeepers closed their stores to attend. Even the telegraph operator left his post, drawn by the promise of resolution to a drama that had captured the town's imagination. Judge Harrison entered, his black robe sweeping as he took his seat. The room fell silent, save for the creak of wooden benches and the distant call of meadowlarks through the open windows. This court will examine new evidence in the matter of railroad claims versus Boone Family Holdings, the judge announced, his voice carrying to the farthest corner. Present your findings. Mary rose, her step steady as she approached the bench. The folder trembled slightly in her hands, but her voice rang clear. Your Honor, we present guardianship papers filed by our father, Charles Boone, at the county seat. These documents establish his legal claim to raise us as his daughters, dating from 1879. She opened the folder, carefully lifting out the precious papers. The railroad lawyer, Edwin Pike, leaned forward, his face tightening as he watched. Judge Harrison adjusted his spectacles, studying each page with careful attention. The silence stretched, broken only by the shuffle of paper and the collective held breath of the assembled crowd. These appear to be in order, the judge said finally. Properly witnessed, properly filed. Mr. Pike, do you wish to examine the documents? The railroad lawyer stood, straightening his vest. Indeed, Your Honor. His polished boots clicked against the floorboards as he approached the bench. Pike's fingers were almost eager as he took the papers, but his expression soon soured. He flipped through them again, searching for any flaw, any weakness he could exploit. Your Honor, he began, these documents could easily be forgeries. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? Just when the railroad's claim seems strongest, these papers mysteriously appear. A murmur of displeasure rippled through the crowd. Judge Harrison raised his hand for silence. The county clerk verified these documents himself, Mary spoke up. The originals have been on file for 37 years. Our father renewed them regularly, ensuring their preservation. But why hide them until now, Pike demanded. Why not present them immediately when the railroad's claim was first made? Because we didn't know they existed, Sarah answered, standing beside her sister. Our father never told us. He wanted us to trust in love, not legal papers, to bind us as family. Judge Harrison nodded slowly, studying Charles's signature. I knew Charles Boone, he said, his voice thoughtful. Knew him to be a man of few words but deep principle. These actions align with his character. Pike wasn't finished. He turned to face the crowded room, his voice taking on a theatrical edge. Ladies and gentlemen, consider the implications. 9 girls, taken in under suspicious circumstances. One of them, he pointed at Amelia, clearly of native blood. What right did Charles Boone have to claim these children? The right of mercy, Amelia's voice rang out, surprising even her sisters. She stood, her dark eyes meeting Pike's accusatory stare. The right of a good man who found abandoned children and chose to give them a home, a family, a future. The courthouse fell absolutely silent. Amelia continued, her voice gathering strength. Yes, I am of Comanche blood. My father protected me from those who would have seen me dead or displaced. He protected all of us. Orphans, abandoned ones, children no one else wanted. He fed us, clothed us, taught us to read and write, to work hard and trust in God. Tears glimmered in her eyes, but her voice remained steady. He filed these papers not to prove his love, we never doubted that, but to protect us from people who would try to tear our family apart. People like you, Mr. Pike, who see only profit where we see home. A sound of approval rumbled through the courthouse. Old-timers nodded, remembering Charles's quiet dedication. Women wiped their eyes, moved by Amelia's testimony. Pike's face flushed. Your Honor, I object to this emotional manipulation. Objection overruled. Judge Harrison cut in firmly. This court recognizes the validity of the guardianship papers. Charles Boone legally claimed these 9 women as his daughters, ensuring their right to inherit his property. He lifted additional documents from his desk. Furthermore, I have here the original land grant, signed and witnessed, establishing Charles Boone's rightful ownership of the disputed property. The railroad's claim is based on surveyor's errors that this court now dismisses. Pike started to protest, but the judge continued. The ruling of this court is as follows. The land claim of the Boone sisters is upheld. The railroad's petition is denied. This case is closed. The crack of his gavel was almost lost in the sudden eruption of cheers. People leaped to their feet, applauding. The sisters clung to each other, tears flowing freely now. "Order," Judge Harrison called, though he was smiling. "This court is adjourned." The crowd surged forward. Mrs. Patterson, the preacher's wife who had brought bread so many years ago, was the first to embrace Amelia. "Child," she whispered, "you've always belonged here. We just needed reminding." Other townspeople followed, offering handshakes, hugs, and apologies for past doubts. Pike gathered his papers and slipped away, his defeat complete. The sisters made their way onto the courthouse steps, blinking in the bright sunlight. The town stretched before them, familiar streets and buildings now seeming somehow new, as if transformed by the morning's events. "Pa would be proud," Hannah said softly, squeezing Amelia's hand. "He was always proud of us," Emma replied, "every day, every moment." Beth laughed suddenly through her tears. "Remember how he used to say, 'The Lord works in his own time'?" 37 years, Sophie mused. He kept those papers safe all that time, just waiting for when we'd need them most. The town's celebration spilled into the street. Someone began singing Amazing Grace, and others joined in. The sisters' voices blended with the chorus, rising clear and strong in the mountain air. Later, as the sun began to set, they gathered on the cabin's porch. The victory celebration had moved to the fairgrounds, but they needed this quiet moment together. "What happens now?" Rebecca asked, settling into her familiar spot by the railing. "We keep Pa's legacy alive," Mary answered. "The cabin, the land, it all stays in the family." "Together," Sarah added, just as he planned. Amelia stood at the porch steps, looking out over the ridge where Charles had first brought them so long ago. The evening light painted the mountains gold, just as it had that winter day when 9 little girls followed a quiet mountain man into a new life. "He knew," she said softly. "He knew someday we'd need more than just his love to protect us, so he gave us both, the legal claim and the heart's claim." "And now everyone knows what we always knew," Hannah smiled. "That family isn't about blood or papers. It's about love." The sisters sat together as darkness settled over Timber Ridge, their victory sweet, but somehow smaller than the simple truth they'd always lived. They were Charles Boone's daughters, bound by choice, by love, and now, by law. The proof had been there all along, carefully preserved by a father who had seen further than anyone knew. From town came the distant sounds of celebration, but here on the ridge, in the home Charles had built, his daughters found their own quiet joy in being exactly who they had always been. A family. The celebration spilled into the streets of Timber Ridge as townsfolk rushed to prepare an impromptu feast. Women hurried home to fetch their best dishes, while men set up long tables in the town square. Soon, the aroma of roasting beef filled the air, as 3 whole cattle turned on spits over crackling fires. Lanterns swayed on strings stretched between buildings, casting warm light over the gathering. Dozens of pies lined the tables, apple, cherry, and peach, their crusts still warm from afternoon baking. The scent of coffee mingled with wood smoke and evening air. Amazing Grace rose from spontaneous voices, followed by Sweet Hour of Prayer. The hymns Charles had taught his daughters now echoed through the streets where they had once walked as strangers. The 9 sisters joined in, their harmonies practiced from years of singing together. Martha Wilson, the rancher's wife who had once turned away when passing them, approached Amelia where she sat quietly watching the festivities. "Miss Boone," Martha said, twisting her apron, "I owe you an apology. All these years, I let fear and foolish prejudice guide my heart. Can you forgive me?" Amelia reached for Martha's hands, her eyes gentle. "There's nothing to forgive. We're neighbors now, truly neighbors." Dancing broke out as someone produced a fiddle. The sisters found themselves swept into circles of laughing townspeople. Even Rebecca, who rarely danced since her bout with influenza, joined in, supported by willing partners. Later, as the moon rose over the mountains, the 9 sisters gathered in a quiet corner. They joined hands, heads bowed in prayer. Their voices, soft but steady, gave thanks for their father's foresight, for justice served, and for a community finally whole. "Pa would love this," Sophie whispered, watching the townspeople share food and friendship. Mary squeezed her hand. "He does love it. His spirit is right here with us." Through the gathering darkness, Charles's memory seemed to hover like a blessing over his daughters and the town that had at last embraced them as their own. Dawn painted the Colorado sky in soft rose and amber as the 9 Boone sisters made their way up the mountain trail. Pine needles crunched beneath their boots while morning light filtered through the branches above. Dew sparkled on spider webs stretched between fence posts, catching the sun like strings of tiny diamonds. The cabin stood waiting, its weathered logs holding 37 years of memories. They paused at the door, each touching the rough wood their father's hands had hewn. Inside, they set to work with determined joy. Sarah and Rebecca scrubbed the plank floors on hands and knees, while Mary and Sophie polished the window glass until it gleamed. Hannah and Elizabeth hung fresh quilts on the walls, bright patterns they'd sewn together during the trial. Pa always kept things just so, Jane remembered, running her hand along the clean mantel. Everything had its proper place. By noon, the cabin smelled of soap and pine. Margaret stirred a pot of beans on the cook stove, while Amelia mixed cornbread batter in their mother's old bowl. The simple meal had sustained them through countless winter nights. They gathered around the table, passing the steaming cornbread. Stories flowed as naturally as the creek outside, tales of Charles's quiet strength and the stubborn humor that had carried them through hard times. "Remember how he'd sing off-key while chopping wood?" Sophie asked, smiling through tears. "And the way he'd pray over every meal, no matter how simple," added Rebecca. Amelia's voice grew soft as she shared her own memory. "Once, when soldiers passed through the valley, he held me close behind the barn, told me I was his daughter true as any, no matter what anyone said." Her sisters reached to squeeze her hands, their love flowing without words. As evening settled over the mountains, they sat in the lamplight, 9 women bound by more than blood. Through the window, the first stars appeared, the same stars Charles had taught them to navigate by, long ago. Twilight settled over the Colorado highlands like a soft purple blanket. The 9 Boone sisters stepped onto the cabin's wide wooden porch, their skirts rustling in the evening breeze. Below them, the lights of Timber Ridge began to twinkle one by one, each lamp and lantern a warm beacon in the gathering dusk. Rebecca drew her shawl closer, breathing in the pine-scented air. "Just like when we were little," she whispered. "Remember how Pa would have us count the lights coming on at night?" The valley stretched before them, embraced by towering mountains still touched with the day's last golden light. These were the peaks Charles Boone had loved, the rugged slopes where he'd found his calling not as a lone mountain man, but as a father to 9 lost souls. Sarah reached for Elizabeth's hand, and soon all 9 sisters stood linked together, their shoulders touching in the cool mountain air. The bond between them felt stronger than ever, tempered by trial and triumph, shaped by a love that had defied convention. "Look there," Sophie said softly, pointing to where the first star had appeared above the eastern ridge. "Pa taught us that one, the evening star." Mary squeezed Amelia's hand tighter. "Pa always said the Lord's family is bigger than blood," she said, her voice carrying quiet certainty. He was right. Amelia stood at the center of her sisters, her heart full and settled. The questions that had haunted her throughout their childhood, about belonging, about her Comanche heritage, felt answered at last. Charles Boone had chosen them all, had fought for them all, had loved them all equally. His signature on those guardianship papers proved what his actions had always shown. A soft melody rose from Hannah's lips, the familiar notes of Amazing Grace floating on the evening air. One by one, her sisters joined in, their voices weaving together as naturally as they had in childhood. The hymn lifted toward the darkening sky, carrying their gratitude and joy. Behind them, the cabin's lamplight spilled through the windows, casting a warm glow that wrapped around them like their father's embrace. Their shadows stretched long across the porch boards, 9 silhouettes standing strong and united against the endless frontier night. The mountains rose eternal before them, and the stars emerged in their ancient dance. Here, on the land their father had claimed and fought to protect, the Boone sisters stood as living proof that family transcends all boundaries. Their legacy, like Charles's love, would endure as long as the mountains themselves. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.